all the way at the other end, far to my right, which he isn't, is James Carville, who led the 1992 Clinton campaign, and the Ragin' Cajun was a powerful force in national dialogue and in a lot of Democratic Senate and gubernatorial campaigns before that. Next is Senator Jeff Flake, who I now feel I'm becoming best friends with, who's the author of The Conscience of a Conservative, a rare Senate Republican who dared to disagree with Trump. Third is Karl Rove, the chief strategist of the 2000 and 2004 Bush campaigns, and a powerful voice in the public arena in the GOP. Finally, Bret Stephens, the New York Times columnist who recently wrote an op-ed entitled, "Can Anyone Save the GOP?" Now, James has asked me if he can start this off by presenting a gift to Karl. Go ahead.
So Karl writes a year-end column in Wall Street Journal making his predictions for 2020. And his first prediction was that James Carville would be happy because LSU would win a national championship. So Karl, you 1 for 1 on the year, and I bought you a gift. Now, you know who that is?
That's General Sherman.
That's General William Tecumseh Sherman, who was the first president of LSU. And it says, kicking ass from the get-go. So you wear this around, and we will ask you what it is, and you'll now know. He torched Georgia in January of 155 years ago, and he torched South Carolina or torched Georgia in December and torched South Carolina in January. And Joe Burrow and Sherman grew up 42 miles from each other. So,
wow. So we're going to talk. We're going to talk about the rest of Karl's predictions and whatever other predictions people have. And I'm going to start with James. From an analytical point of view, not what you want, but what do you think is happening in the Democratic race right now?
So you're supposed to come here and I'm supposed to make all you Democrats feel good and all you Republicans feel nervous. I can't do that. I'm nervous. I see, if I play it out, it's really you got to have some assumptions that we get to the fall united. And I think that the divisions are gonna manifest themselves. Hopefully somebody emerges with the skill that can unite the party and go forward. But there's a high chance. I mean, the Republican Party doesn't exist anymore, and there's a chance that we fracture. It really is. The process and how it goes on. Biden, the best scenario, if you just wanted the Democrats to win, is Biden win Iowa and New Hampshire. That doesn't seem to me to be very likely to happen. And there's a real good chance this thing comes down to Bloomberg and Bernie. By the way, neither one who have been traditional Democrats, which is really kind of odd. But the kind of Bloomberg scenario that Bernie would emerge and he would be the last one standing is, can't tell you that 50-50 is going to happen, but that's not a long way out there kind of prediction. I could see that happening easily. And then when that happens, who knows what? But you're going to have some pretty serious rifts. But it's really funny because a non-Republican pretty much did end the Republican Party, and the Democrats, at their hour of great need, might be faced with two people who are not really Democrats. Or I guess Bloomberg is now. Bernie Sanders, tell you right now, he's a socialist. He's not a Democrat. He's not even a member of the party.
Yeah.
I mean,
Bloomberg has actually switched parties as often as Winston Churchill did at the beginning of the 20th century. Let me follow up on that. Do the rest of you agree that if a Sanders or a Warren emerges from the early primaries and Biden falters, that Bloomberg, with this enormous throw weight of his billions and his advertising, can not only become the moderate alternative or the center-left alternative, but actually prevail? Karl?
I'm a little dubious about it. I have great respect for Michael Bloomberg, and he did an extraordinary job as mayor. But as James says, he's not really a Democrat in the traditional sense. And I just think that the idea of the billionaire is going to, if it ends up being the billionaire versus Bernie, a lot of Democrats will say, you know what, I want the true Democrat. But I frankly don't think, I think Bloomberg is overrated. His entire strategy is based on Biden imploding before March 3rd, and on March 3rd, where over 40% of the delegates to the Democratic National Convention are going to be elected, that he has spent probably $1 billion by that day. And already, 2 weeks ago, he was at $217 million on television alone. But, you know, I bet you he's close to $1 billion by the 3rd of March. And the idea is that somehow or another, Biden is going to collapse by that day. He's going to inherit Biden. He's going to inherit the center of the Democratic Party, and he's going to somehow become the guy. And I just don't see it's going to be that easy. I'm with James. I think the Democrats have a real problem with fracturing because Bernie has momentum, enthusiasm, excitement, and he's leading in both Iowa and New Hampshire. I don't think he does as well in Nevada and South Carolina, and this thing goes on to be a contest. But he got 46% of the vote last time around against Hillary. It can't be easily dispatched by billions from Bloomberg.
Do you think Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren's electable?
Yeah.
You do. Go ahead.
Oh, sure. I don't know about Warren, but Sanders certainly. First of all, anyone who's the nominee is electable, period. I think if you're the nominee of a major party, there's at least a 40% chance you're going to win the election.
Having been McGovern's speechwriter in 1972, I'm not sure I entirely agree with that.
Except for McGovern. Look, I mean, my whole experience of this comes from trying to think seriously about my serial mistakes when it came to thinking about the 2016 election, where not just I, but I think also my colleagues at the time at the Wall Street Journal were convinced that while Trump had a great deal of enthusiasm behind him, it was a kind of a fringe movement, that there was a hard ceiling to his support, that the fact that he was likely, quote unquote, unelectable would make mainstream Republicans see reason at some point during the primary season, that he would inevitably say something or some revelation from his past would come to light that would sink his candidacy. That if, in the improbable event that he won the nomination, there was no chance in hell that he would win the election. Wrong on every count. And so, you know, it behooves us to at least think through those errors. And the reason that Trump was able to win is that he spoke in his way. I don't agree with much of what he has to say, but he spoke a deep truth to a large section of the Republican base. And he seemed a guy who was willing to say things that other competitors weren't willing to say. The fact that he was able to draw those enormous crowds was a very telling indicator that people should have been looking at, the evidence of the senses, as opposed to all this kind of punditry and polling data suggesting that he couldn't go there. Sanders has all of those strengths, and I think then some. There's another aspect with Sanders, which is that if he becomes the nominee, I don't see Democrats moving away from him, because the desire to unseat Trump is so powerful among Democrats that I think most of the Democratic Party will swallow hard and vote for Bernie and hope that he'll be contained by Congress, whereas a great many Republicans, wavering Republicans or moderates, did vote for Hillary Clinton in the last election. I'll only say one more thing with respect to Bloomberg. I don't think Bloomberg has much of a chance, but if, in the happy event that he did become the nominee, his slogan should be, "Vote for me, I'm a real billionaire."
Actually, he was asked in Texas the other night, do you think the American people would accept a presidential race between two Texas billionaires? And he replied, who's the other one?
Yeah, two New York billionaires.
Jeff?
I don't think, I don't think it's wise to easily dismiss Joe Biden. I think those who would have dismissed him or prone to dismissed him by now. And he's still there, and he's still leading in most of the country. And recent polling does suggest that Democrats, and I think this has led to Elizabeth Warren sinking in the polls, is because they do value beating Donald Trump more than they value having somebody that they agree with on most every issue. So I recognize, my own predictive failures in the last election in all of us. But I think that might lead us to say, well, that Michael Bloomberg can't be counted out if Joe falters. I do think that if you look at the midterm elections as any kind of proxy, there were 15 million more Democratic votes cast around the country than Republican votes. And a lot of those will be so-called wasted in California or others given the Electoral College. But there is a lot more enthusiasm, and I do think that will be toward someone that they believe can beat Donald Trump. So I think that Joe Biden is still the likely candidate, and in that case, I still think it's the Democrats to lose. But I do think that either Bernie or Elizabeth would lose to Donald Trump.
I want to turn to, unless you had something to say, Karl, you're leaning. I want to turn to a couple other things about the Democratic race before I turn to the other side. Kamala Harris, for example, entered the race, thought that her whole card was South Carolina because the electorate there is heavily African American. And it turned out that African Americans didn't rally to her. In fact, she wasn't doing very well with them. And the same thing happened to Cory Booker. And the same thing happened with Hispanics or Latinx to Julian Castro. What's happened, James, to the idea that identity politics was somehow or other going to take over this race?
Right. If you just look at Kamala Harris, right, it's a baseball prospect. It's God, this woman is like, she's a California, she was attorney general, she's good looking, she's got pedigree. She had nothing to say. She just stepped up to the plate and took 3 pitches and dropped the bat and went back to the dugout. Okay? I mean, she said, well, she couldn't figure out her position on health care, which was, kind of a big issue in the Democratic Party. I mean, she took 3 looks and that was it. Oh, you got to swing the bat, you got to try. I mean, everybody was kind of excited. I don't. Look, the best scenario is Biden, but there's a saying in the Marine Corps: if you wish in one hand and do something else in the other hand will fill up faster than the hand you wish in. All right. And I just have.
We're getting
I have
close.
this great
We're getting
fear,
close
and
to
I'm
the line
just
here.
going to say it. I fear that the Democratic Party becomes the Labour Party in the UK, where they ran against a guy who was unpopular, who couldn't even comb his hair, thank you, got into something he has no idea, or got out of something he has no idea to get into, and they got crushed because they became unacceptable. It was an election they should have won hands down. And they didn't. And so when you go and say, yeah, it's just if they're going to vote, you're right. The Republicans I don't buy this myth that they have all the strength. He got 46.1 in 2016. They got 44.8 in 2018. They're polling at 42.5. There's convergence. Like 57% of the country wants a change. And if we put somebody up that offers some reasonable change, we have acts. People say, when do you change? When do you get these crazy people to change their mind? We're not going to change their mind. But you got a pool for 57 that you're drawing from. That's a good number. That's a really good number. And, the other thing that's happened in American politics, I'm sorry, the suburbs have become Democratic and came fast. But those voters are not Democrats like I am. Most of them voted Republican or kind of moderate. They became Democrats because of Trump. You can lose these people. And that's what I worry about.
Yeah.
And also, in the Bernie people, anybody that's not with them is a sellout, a traitor, a corporate whore, you name it. And if you look at the stories that they give these people on Facebook, once you go down that path, it's very hard to pull back. It's very hard. And I want to make one thing. There's a difference between Sanders and Warren. All right, Elizabeth Warren is a Democrat. And she's a capitalist at the end of the day. All right, she is. I mean, you may not like that she wants higher taxes or anything, but at the end of the day, she is. I mean, they get lumped together, I think, my own personal view, is that she did too much to try to chase his left tail around. And if she is able to scratch out a third and she can come back in a redemptive way and talk about the things that she learned, but I do not equate her and Sanders in the same thing. I really don't.
Karl?
Yeah, I'm with James on the view that Sanders is dangerous for the Democrats. Yeah, the Democrats could be for him, but this election is going to be decided by 8 to 10 or 11 or 12% of the electorate that says, I'm open to voting, I'd like to vote against Trump, but I'm not going to vote for a lunatic. And if you want some evidence of this, take a look at House District 28 in Texas last night. This is a district that was won by Donald Trump by 10 points, but has been going away from the Republican Party. Our very popular Republican incumbent state legislator got 8% in 2018. Ted Cruz won the district by 3.1%, which is pretty damn close in Texas. The Democrats came in big, spent $1.3 million on behalf of a woman named Markowitz. Biden endorsed her. Bloomberg went door to door. Warren endorsed her. Robert Francis O'Rourke literally moved there the last 6 weeks. Julian Castro came in and went door to door. Holder endorsed. Obama endorsed. 500,000 from their national super PAC on state legislative races. You know, $1.3 million. 97% of her contributions were from outside the district. 71% of them from outside of Texas. The Republican is sort of goofy. He's adopted 11 children, does triathlons, and is sort of goofy. Crushed her 58-46 in the largest turnout in the history of any Texas special House election. It was a third larger than the next biggest one.
58-46. What's going on with the voting in Texas?
I'm sorry, 58-42. 58-42. So he gets twice the margin that his popular predecessor, who resigned in order to become the chancellor, vice chancellor of the University of Texas System for Health, in charge of all their health thing. So what happened? They brought in the National Democrats. So you had Elizabeth Warren, who's in favor of an immediate ban on fracking, and this is a Houston energy suburb. You had Joe Biden, who's in favor of an immediate end to drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, which is a huge driver, the biggest single driver in the Houston economy. You had Julian Castro, who goes door to door in favor of universal health care for illegals. And you have, Robert Francis O'Rourke, who said, by God, yes, we are taking your guns, and we're going to take the evangelical church's tax exemption away if they don't agree with me on homosexuality. And I mean, they nationalized this race, and what happened is those suburbanites who are willing to vote for Joe Biden or a reasonable Democrat said, the Republican is talking about property tax relief, public school support, school safety programs, emergency preparedness because it's a hurricane area, and he's talking about things I care about, and here's all these national nutty Democrats coming in talking about things that offend me as a suburbanite. The one thing that will bring the suburbanites back, they're loosely linked today for the purpose of the midterm with Democrats, but the thing that's going to bring them back to the Republicans in 2020 is going to be if the Democrats nominate somebody who scares the shit out of them, and Bernie does it.
Okay, Bret.
You said it, I didn't.
Bret, I am
But you agree with it.
Bret, I am fascinated with this identity politics question I ask, and we're going to do more horse race stuff. But it's very interesting to me that African Americans didn't go to the African American candidates, Hispanics didn't go to Castro, and the USC Dorn Seif LA Times poll is going to have some very interesting data on who women are supporting on Friday.
And Buttigieg doesn't get the youth vote.
Yeah. So what's happening?
Because I think identity politics are a bit overrated. First of all, often what seems to an outsider as an identity fit doesn't necessarily seem like an identity fit for an insider. I mean, I'm Jewish. The idea of me voting for Bernie Sanders is insane.
Would you vote for Trump if he was the nominee?
I'd vote for whoever the libertarian is. So I think we tend to exaggerate just how those identity affinities. You vote for the candidate ultimately that you fall in love with. And that sense of passion is, I think, the great driver of politics, which is why I disagree with James and Karl about Bernie's chances if he becomes the nominee. I mean, I appreciate and I understand the power of the argument, but it is hard to argue with those crowds. And I've got to tell you, if you're under the age of, I'm 46, meaning the Soviet Union collapsed when I was about 18. I just turned 18 years old. Anyone younger than I am, the word socialism, the fact that Bernie Sanders was hanging out with Ortega, all this stuff that matters to someone of my age and older means zero or next to zero to any of your kids or grandchildren. And when Sanders says socialism, what are you talking about? I'm talking about Copenhagen and great medical care. It's actually fairly credible. The fact is that he has qualities of sincerity and a certain kind of monomania that have an appeal for the same reason that if you had told me at January of 2016 when I first was coming to this festival, it's going to be Donald Trump, I would say, you're crazy. He's not even a Republican. He's obviously out of his mind. And, at any given moment, he's going to start quoting Benito Mussolini, which at one point he did. And it didn't stop anything because he was able to reach deep into the heart and soul of a certain corner of a Republican base and persuade the remaining Republicans that whatever his flaws, he was preferable to the alternative on the other side. That's why Trump won then. I think that's why Sanders has a very good chance to win now.
Jeff?
I think for the same reason, you talk about Trump winning, is a lot because of economic anxiety that he played on, particularly in the key states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. And I think that Bernie will, if he is the nominee, get most of the Democratic votes. But there are a lot of independents out there, and it's that 8 to 10% that Karl mentioned that simply won't go for him. That I think spells a Trump re-election if he is the nominee. So I think that there are a lot of millennials who don't understand what socialism is. That is completely right, and aren't as concerned. But those who are going to the ballot box with some economic anxiety or some concerns aren't going to go for Bernie. I think they will go for Trump in that instance.
David Wasserman called me this morning. Do you know what Joe Biden's number in Iowa is in Quinnipiac, 18 to 34-year-olds? No. Yeah. 3%. And if Wasserman says it, I didn't double check it, but he's got a reputation of being a pretty accurate guy. And to the point, and I taught at Tulane for a long time, and they were in 08. And if you're if you're 20 years old, your experience with capitalism hadn't been very positive. I mean, your parents went through the housing bust. You've seen inequality. You've seen the cost of education skyrocket. I mean, they don't have any particular reason to be enamored with the free market system. They really don't. And now, if you read two pieces, John Chait, who I probably agree with more than any single human being in the world, in New York Magazine, and read Ron Brownstein, who's a very, very savvy political analyst, who's a very smart guy, on just the cost of the stuff that Bernie is proposing. Now, people say, well, if you're just gonna bolster the Republican argument. If you say, yeah, they're gonna come out and say $40 trillion. And they're gonna have like the Brookings Institute or something like that. Say, well, it's in a range. And people have to, if you want to make an informed choice, make an informed choice. And the other thing is, Bernie Sanders has never been vetted. Has never been vetted. And I'm just going to tell you why. Because he ran against Hillary, so the press is definitely not going to vet him. And now everybody is scared to. But you read Jonathan Chait, and you read Ron Brownstein. And, this is something the other side tries. When people say, yeah, we just go do this, and we need to run this play, and we'll do that, you know what? They're trying to tackle you. That's the way the game works. And I just hope, look, whoever the nominee is, will be formed. I just hope the Democrats make an informed choice. Because right now, they don't have all of the information. That's my central point.
So you don't even need to read Chait. Just watch the Nora O'Donnell interview in the last 36 hours, where Bernie she says, "What's the price tag?" And he says, "Well, I don't know."
I don't know.
But I don't care.
He doesn't pretend
No.
that it's not going to cost him. The one thing that Bernie, the most destructive virus in the Democratic Party is cultural arrogance. And Bernie is not culturally arrogant. I will give him that. He does not give the aura that he thinks he's better than you.
Right.
But he says, yeah, of course it's going to cost more. But why don't you just add the tab? One more thing. I think climate. I'm scared to death. I'm telling you right now. There's nobody scared. However, you really want to get rid of nuclear energy? I think we ought to be building more nuclear plants. For God's sakes, man. We can figure engineering out. Mm-hmm. You could extract every gram of carbon from the atmosphere, and South Louisiana is still going to flood for the next 25 years. We got to have engineering. I mean, we're dead. You have no idea how bad this is. People don't. But if you got to treat it seriously, and then if anybody comes to you, yeah, I think you got to tax the living crap out of carbon. You got to have nuclear. You got to have engineering. You got to have diplomacy. I mean, treat it like it's a serious problem. And culturally, they say, well, they're going to green you. We're going to have a federal job gap. Don't deal with it on its own without acknowledging that there's no doubt this is the biggest crisis the world's ever. This is the biggest crisis we ever faced. But you got to be serious about it. And you know, the frackers ran the coal company out of business. The environmentalists didn't. They did. That's the truth. You can't ban it right now. You're just not going to go over it. You got to be. We're not taking this issue seriously, I don't think.
Okay, I want to move on to Trump and the general election, but before that, I just want to come down, and James, you can start. What's your take on Iowa? What's your prediction? We're 5 days out.
My take is that the turnout is going to be so enormous, and it's going to be so difficult. In the 15% threshold, we're going to be surprised. We might be surprised that Bernie Sanders wins the thing by 11 points. We might be, but the idea that this is going to end up like 27, 23, 20, 18, 17, I don't think that's going to happen. And I think that the whole system is, I appreciate it. I had a long interview with Michael Gardner. The whole system is going to be taxed. And the way they do it is, we didn't have to do it in 92 because Harkin was running against us, so we didn't compete in Iowa. But you go in there, and it's a real, you get a fine, and everybody does, and if you don't get 15%, you go to the other place. Watch it turn out. Mike McDonald told me, I interviewed him, there was about 135 million people vote in 2016. It might be 160 million. When you interject that kind of engagement in the political process, I don't know, something's going to change. Something's going to give. 2018 had the highest turnout in an off-year election since the women were granted the right to vote. We understand that. That's not a little tidbit to pass around in a bar at night. That's a staggering story. That's staggering. And the levels of engagement are just going up. This is not a good time for the prediction industry.
Jeff? Oh. Jeff, you want to go to work in the prediction industry? Tell me what you think is going to happen in Iowa.
I think Bernie wins Iowa, but it doesn't matter much because it doesn't last. I mean, Rick Santorum won Iowa for the Republicans in 2012. Nobody knew it that night, and by the time the next day happened, everybody had moved on to, because they thought Mitt Romney won. It was actually Santorum. But it doesn't matter. You move so quickly to New Hampshire afterwards. It's almost an afterthought. And I do think Bernie will win, but Biden's challenge is not to come in third or fourth or down the list of ways. And as long as he's competitive, then he's set up well for not necessarily New Hampshire, but North Carolina later.
Nevada.
Or South Carolina.
Karl?
Yeah, I'm with James that this is going to overwhelm the Democratic apparatus, and this requirement that you show up at one of these 1,681 precincts, and if your candidate doesn't have 15%, you either get to go home or change your mind and go with somebody else. That's going to cause this night to be very long. I do disagree with James. I'm more with Jeff on this. The senators are, I think, right. I think it's going to be relatively close. I think there are going to be at least three probably 4, and could even be 5 candidates who get delegates. There are 41 delegates. I would not be surprised to see the top, between number 1 and number 3, for the difference in delegates to be the difference between 16 and 13. So I think they're going to be crammed up there. I do think Bernie is going to have some momentum coming out of Iowa and New Hampshire, because I think he's going to win both. But then he goes screaming into Nevada, and in Nevada, he's got a big group of Sandinistas running around out to the state. But a big player in the Democratic side of the culinary union who hate Medicare for all, because they love their gold-plated private health insurance, and it's actually how they get their members. They say to members, if you're slinging, hash in a diner, or you're waiting tables, or you're cleaning rooms in a hotel, join the culinary union and we'll give you gold-plated health insurance. It's how they recruit their members. So they ain't going for Bernie. So I think between South Carolina, where again they're not going to go for that guy from the weird state where they drink, coffee with maple syrup in it. They're going to go for Biden, and I think we're going to find ourselves on March 3rd with at least 2 and probably 3 or 4 candidates having blocks of delegates in some sense that they can be a player.
Bret?
Well, I love making predictions where you might remember my mistake. But here we are. I mean, I suspect that Bernie wins narrowly in Iowa, handsomely in New Hampshire, moves on with a considerable amount of momentum. And let's not forget, the case for Joe Biden, as far as I can tell, is entirely on paper rather. You actually see the candidate, and it's another story. And that form of retail politics really still does matter. I mean, he just seems to me, and I have great respect for him as a man and so on, but a kind of, I'm going to say this, the Jeb Bush of the 2020 cycle, that appears to be terrific in theory, and then doesn't connect, doesn't communicate, feels, how shall I put it, distinctly low energy. And I'm a great...
Even you're quoting Trump, for God's sake, man.
Well, and that will have an effect. I mean, I know that, I think, by the way, the primary process, the caucus and primary process, I think works a little distinctly between Republicans and Democrats, which is that Republicans really, I think, alight on the obvious candidate at an earlier stage, and then there's a sort of process of tribulation, and then it happens. Whereas Democrats really, it strikes me, have a habit of falling in love. And when love strikes, it's like lightning and thunder, in the way that when Obama won in Iowa in 2008, boy, everyone remember that election, that Hillary Clinton was a shoo-in. But there was no love for her, and boy, was there love for him.
I think Senator Flake, you mentioned Senator Santorum. Bob Kerry had the funniest line in American politics, where he said that Santorum is a Latin word for asshole.
All right, a couple comments.
You don't have to comment on that. I'll probably get in trouble for language here, but it's a pretty good line.
I want to do a couple comments on Iowa. First, we ought to realize there are going to be 3 metrics in Iowa. They're going to report for the first time the initial total vote, including the people who don't make threshold of 15%. They're going to report then the vote of people who do make 15%, leaving out the ones who didn't. And then they're going to report what they call delegate equivalents, which is the number of delegates who go to the regional convention. Now, we could end up with 3 winners, but I'm going to go out on a limb. The Iowa Democrats have proved to be pretty pragmatic, since every Democratic nominee since '96 has won Iowa. And I think that as the minds get concentrated over these 5 days, that Joe Biden, whose numbers have held up remarkably well nationally, after everybody predicted he was going to fall apart, I think there's a good chance he's going to win the caucuses. I say that, by the way, remembering that on Showtime, on the circus, the Sunday before the 2016 election, I said, no how, no way, not in this universe or any other universe, can Donald J. Trump be elected President of the United States. Now I want to turn to the Republicans. I want to start with Karl. I want to turn to Trump, actually. The Trump strategy so far seems to be to double down on a campaign directed to his base. Last time he drew to an inside straight narrowly carrying Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, changed 38,000 votes, Hillary Clinton as president. If you were in charge of the Trump campaign, what strategy would you have Trump pursue, and do you think he'll do it?
Well, first of all, let me slightly disagree with you. I think they talk like they are spending all of their time focused on the 46%, but in reality they're not, and people are starting to pick up that they are not. If you talk to them, they are going to make a legitimate effort to get themselves from 8% of the African American vote to 13 or 14, which may sound anemic, but if you win Michigan by 11,000 votes and you got 8% of the African American vote, and now suddenly you get 11 or 12, you add another 10 or 20,000 votes to your total. The same with Latinos. They're looking at the economy saying, we got 28%, can we get ourselves to 32 or 33? The question I have is whether or not they have a strategy for the suburbanites whom they got in 2016 in sufficient numbers because it was Hillary Clinton they were running against, and whom they then lost in 2018. So, look, I think the strategy is reasonably simple. Duplicate what Barack Obama did in 2012. His reelect numbers in December of 2011 were similar to where the president's reelect numbers were in 2019. And Obama did three things. One is he said, I have a second act, used the State of the Union address and other things throughout the summer, most prominently the Dreamers in the summer of 2012, to say, I got a second act in me. The second thing he did was he irradiated Mitt Romney, particularly at a moment of vulnerability. This is a plutocrat who doesn't have any concern for ordinary Americans. He's got an elevator in his garage in La Jolla, paid for by all that money that he raped and pillaged all those companies that he, quote, consulted with or advised. And they did that starting at the moment of vulnerability for him, the late spring, early summer, when Romney was going to be the nominee but was out of money. And thirdly, they had a meticulous effort aimed at creating an army of persuasion to get out their vote. And on the third thing, that the Trump campaign's doing that. Whether they're going to do the other two, I think, are very much up for grabs.
We only have like 7.5 minutes, but James, you're taking notes. What do you want to say?
The dominant feeling among Democrats around the country, and a lot of you in here, I'm going to tell you what it is: fear. Okay, that's what every Democrat feels deep down inside. We can't blow this. All right, and that permeates everything. And this is going to be a journey. It's not going to get decided Monday night. It's not going to get decided in a short period of time. And given the levels of engagement they have, where people are, look at the Democratic fundraising numbers. Look at the Senate as opposed to Senate Democrats opposed to the Senate Republicans. Look at what there's so much money is pouring in on the Democratic side, but you just can't stop it because everybody is scared. And people are going to focus, then they're going to refocus, and they're going to focus down the line. These are not normal times. They're not. It's not a predictable thing. It's just too much engagement, too much fear, too much turmoil. I don't know what the hell is going to happen, but like a lot of Democrats, I'm scared.
If I were to advise the Trump administration, it'd be to work on those areas.
They
like
might not listen.
Pharmaceuticals and
Right.
and whatnot, where you can go in to suburban USA and say, here's what I've done working with the Democrats. Don't mind all this. Here's what we're doing. Problem is those opportunities are quickly vanishing in an election year, opportunities to work with the other side. And when he gets in campaign mode, you can't look at any of the campaign stops like the one last night in New Jersey and try to argue he is appealing to a broader electorate. He knows nothing, I think, on the campaign trail but to double down. And the time to work with Congress and actually getting something that you can point to, saying, I'm really doing these things, is quickly vanishing.
Yeah, look, wait a minute. USMCA, and then look, he's not my favorite, and I'm not his favorite. Okay, so but give the guy the due. Strong economy, good jobs numbers, USMCA, China, and we can talk all day long as to whether or not it's a big deal, but it looks like a big deal. And he has a similar ability in the balance of the year to say, we're working on China second round, and we're making great progress with the UK on a free trade deal with Britain, which they want to have and we want to have. So he doesn't necessarily need to have things in Congress. But I want to say I agree totally with James on the point that there are so many variables and there's so much at stake in this election that it's going to be hard to predict this. More than any election since maybe 1980, the outcome is going to depend on how the individual campaigns and candidates and parties handle themselves from the time of the Democratic Convention in July in Milwaukee and the Republican Convention in August in Charlotte through to the election day, because there are going to be a lot of people who sit there regardless of who the nominee is. Dynamic is different, obviously, if it's Biden than if it's Sanders, but there are going to be a lot of people sitting there saying, all right, I know what I got. Is the other thing going to be any better for me for the next 4 years? And how the two candidates, Trump and whoever the Democrats choose, handle themselves during those roughly 90 to 110 days is going to be really, really critical in a way we haven't seen since those final moments of October and November of 1980 when the country said, well, most of us are sort of predisposed to vote for Carter, but there are enough of us up for grabs that we're open to voting for that guy Reagan if he convinces us that he's up to the job in the last 20 or 30 days of the election. And that's what happened. He convinced him. And how that's going to play out, I'm with James. Damned if I know. All I know is it's going to be one hell of a thing to watch, and how they handle themselves, how they comport themselves, going to have a huge impact.
Bret, and then I'll come to you, James.
No, I mean, I agree with Karl, damned if I know, too. I mean, I'll offer a kind of a countervailing thought, which I'm not even sure I entirely agree with, but here we are. The art of disagreement extends to myself. Look, other than Sanders or Warren, I'd vote for any Democrat just because I think this president is so atrocious. But this republic will survive a second Trump term, number one, just as we are miraculously all living and breathing right now, 4 years after, 3.5 years into Trump's first term. And the second thing is, if Trump is reelected, it won't be the worst thing for Democrats, because James said something earlier on, which I think is very true. The Democratic Party today is deeply culturally out of touch with where I think the rest of America is. And you see it especially with people for whom the fact that we have 3.5% unemployment in this country, which is a miraculous and fantastic figure, seems to cut no ice, as if it doesn't matter that people at the very margins of the labor market are suddenly finding opportunities to be employed. That really does matter. And when a Democratic Party that historically has purported to represent working class Americans or Americans who are at the very margins of society ceases to care about it because nobody that they know is out of work, nobody that they know, has the kind of struggles that a lot of working class Americans do, then that party is in trouble. And I don't think because the Democrats have spent so much time convincing themselves that Trump basically hoodwinked his way into power, they haven't come to terms in a deep sense with the meaning of his presidency. And something like that ought to happen and will help the Democratic Party in the long term. In the meantime, I desperately hope that the Democrats nominate by some fluke Mike Bloomberg, and then I'll very happily vote.
Okay.
I so fundamentally disagree
We got a minute
that
left.
the Democrats in trouble. Let me stop. Okay, we had the biggest off year in history. Okay, every off election, other than the one in Texas, 85% of the special elections, we profoundly outperformed Democratic performance. We won the governorship in Kentucky and Louisiana. Repeat, Kentucky and Louisiana. All right? This party has 57% of the electorate to draw from. If it's smart, we should win in a landslide. And everybody knows what the economic numbers are. By the way, most of the people that benefit from Trump's economy live in urban areas, and they're Democrats. But this is a party that if it's smart, it'll win the Senate back. We're ahead in 4 Senate seats right now. We're really in the game in 2 seats in Georgia. It's ourselves. We have a golden opportunity. This is the stuff that you wait all of your life to see going into a general election. And I'm just scared to death we're going to throw it over the fence.
Okay, Karl's shaking his head no, but we have to end on this.
They did it. They screwed it up before. They can do
Yeah.
the same.
Well, yeah,
Well,
look,
we
I
can
don't think
nominate.
Trump can get reelected, but as I often say, the Democrats can lose.
He can't talk his way into office. We can talk our way out.
Right. James, Jeff, Karl, and Bret, thank you very much. We could go on twice as long.
That was fun.